Welcome to the Matt Kuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to Behind the Shot. This is a special podcast episode that comes out twice a month where I explore one of my photographs and how I made it. Go ahead and click in the show notes on the link and it will take you to my Flickr page and you will see a photograph called Moon over North Carolina. First of all, I actually enjoy taking photographs of the moon or stars whenever I get a chance to, which is very infrequently. But I just happened to think about going out one night. The moon was very full, very clear, and I noticed that there were also clouds in the sky. Now, one of the techniques that I use, and I've used this technique since back in the 90s, is the idea of sandwiching together two exposures. So what you have here is actually two different exposures, the same scene, same moon, same clouds surrounding the moon, but I actually layered them together in this scene. And there's a reason why you have to do that. There is a significant difference between the bright moon, okay? The moon is a very hot light source. In other words, it's very, very bright. The clouds that surround it are much, much less bright. And if I were to make an exposure of just the moon, I would have a great shot of the moon. Okay, but it would be so, I would be compensating so much for the brightness of the moon that the clouds would go black. And that's called a high contrast situation. And the way that we avoid that is to take two exposures. In the old days, I would take a shot of it with a 35 millimeter film, and I would take a shot of the moon, and then I would take a shot of the clouds. And then I would take it to the darkroom, and I would actually sandwich those negatives together in the carrier, and I would make a photograph. What are the general exposure settings here? That's an interesting question. That's difficult to tell. I think the original image was of the moon, and I shot it with my Canon EOS 7D or EOS 7D. I used my 150 to 600 Sigma contemporary lens. I shot at f9, 786 millimeters at 1/200th of a second. Now, actually, if you want to think of it, it's not really 786 millimeters. It's 786 millimeters, and then you need to add the crop factor in, because this was I actually put my Kenko teleconverter on my lens, which got me out to 786 millimeters, but then you need to add in the 1.6 crop factor, which gets you out to about 960 millimeters. So this is a 960 millimeter shot, effectively. And in order to do that, you really need to have everything tripod mounted, okay? And you need to use either your self timer at probably the 10-second setting. If you use the 2-second setting, you may not you may have subtle shake involved because of the camera still moving after you touch the button. If you use the 10-second timer, it's probably going to be a good shot. In this case, I used a 10-second timer. You could also use a shutter release, remote release. That's perfectly acceptable. But the point here is to make sure you're as locked down, as stable as possible for the first exposure. Now, the second exposure, we're talking about a long exposure. Okay, the clouds are actually blurring, so I forget how long this was. It was probably, it was probably a good, 20 seconds, somewhere around there. I'd have to go back and look and see if I could find the original. But you get the idea. The longer the exposure, the more the clouds streak, and you kind of get this neat effect. Put some motion in the photograph. Again, this is something anybody could do. Doesn't take a whole lot of time. It took me, maybe an hour outside photographing the moon and the clouds, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 minutes of Photoshop work on the other side. I do challenge you to get out there and do some of this type of photography, because even if you're primarily a wildlife photographer, this kind of photography helps expand your skill set. It helps break up the monotony, if you will, of shooting the same subject all the time. So definitely get out there and give it a try. That's pretty much all I had for this Behind the Shot. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.